See if that works. Yep, we got it. Okay, here we are, finally. Apologize for that. I didn't realize that the sound wasn't coming in. I had to go switch to another board tonight. I'm going to bring it up just a little bit. Can you hear me? Test, test, test. Mic check, 1, 2, test, test. Okay, so just a little bit more gain on that. Bring it up just a little bit. Testing, 1, 2, test, test, test. Okay, sorry about that. Here we go. Well, what I was saying was we're on page 31, and we are discussing fear as lack of love, section 4, and we finished the first 2 paragraphs last week before we closed out, but I want to backtrack on those a little bit in case someone is just joining us for the first time, or I think it's good to be discussing it because we're really talking about fear. And as I said before, and you didn't hear me because I was muted, we were talking about the coronavirus. I was discussing, I went to a store today and people seem to be handling it pretty well. I went to a Costco store and people seem to be handling it pretty well. So all things considered, I do believe, that things are going pretty well. So hopefully I'm not clipping too badly here. Let me just bring that down just a little bit. Okay. And hopefully you can hear me okay, and that sounds okay where you are. Fear is a lack of love. And we took a good deep breath and a moment of silence, so I hope you picked up on that. Let's just jump right in. You believe that being afraid is involuntary. I guess if a tiger is after you, you might think that fear, that level of fear is involuntary. But that's the body fear. I think if we're just looking at fear itself, our normal life experience, and do we have fears? And people tell me, no, I'm not afraid of anything, but we are quite clearly very afraid. The ego, that's its entire basis of existence, is fear and guilt. That's its foundation. So we're just going to discuss that as we go forward. And I'm going to go through these first couple of paragraphs pretty quick because we did talk about them at the end of last week's discussion on A Course in Miracles. So you believe that being afraid is involuntary, something beyond your control. Yet I've told you several times that only constructive acts should be involuntary. We've said that Christ's control can take over everything that does not matter, while Christ's guidance can direct everything that does if you so choose. Fear cannot be Christ-controlled, but it can be self-controlled. So it's really up to us to control fear or to recognize the source of fear is from us, coming from us. It prevents me, fear prevents me, as this is Jesus telling you, it's preventing him from controlling it, right? Because it's our creation, really, what we have manifested. The correction is therefore a matter of your will because its presence, fear's presence, shows that you've raised the unimportant to a higher level than it warrants. In other words, fear itself is really unimportant in the grand scheme of things. And we've raised it to a higher level than it warrants. You have thus brought it under your will where it does not belong. This means that you feel responsible for it. The level of confusion here is obvious. 73. The reason I, Jesus, cannot control fear for you is that you are attempting to raise to the mind level the proper content of lower order reality. I do not foster level confusion, but you can choose to correct it. You would not tolerate insane behavior on your part and would hardly advance the excuse that you could not help it. Why should you tolerate insane thinking? There is a confusion here which you would do well to look at clearly. You believe that you are responsible for what you do, but not for what you think. The truth is that you are responsible for what you think because it is only at this level that you can exercise choice. So behavior, as we said last week, is a result of thinking, our consciousness, and what level of consciousness we're operating from. So we're going to jump in now with where we left off last week. We're going to continue now with paragraph 74. What you do comes from what you think. Clearly. right? You cannot separate yourself from the truth by giving autonomy to behavior. This is controlled by me automatically as soon as you place what you think under my guidance. Whenever you are afraid, it's a sure sign that you've allowed your mind to miscreate or have not allowed me to guide it. It is pointless to believe that controlling the outcome of misthought can result in healing. When you are fearful, you have willed wrongly. This is why you feel responsible for it. You must change your mind, not your behavior, and this is a matter of will. So when I read this paragraph, it speaks to me that, Jesus is ever present and available for us. He is our teacher, our comforter, our friend, our guide. But we can block that connection and do and have for almost all of our experience here in the world of form. But he's telling us that he is available and that he is always with us if we would simply allow his thoughts to inform our mind. Paragraph 75, you do not need guidance except at the mind level. Correction belongs only at the level where creation is possible. The term does not mean anything at the symptom level, where it could not or cannot work. The correction of fear is your responsibility. When you are asked for release from fear, you're implying that it is not. You are implying that it is not. Let me read that again. The correction of fear is your responsibility, and when you ask for release from fear, you're implying that it is not your responsibility. You should ask instead for help in the conditions which have brought the fear about. These conditions always entail a separated mind willingness. At that level, you can help it. You are much too tolerant of mind wandering, thus passively condoning its miscreations. On page 32 now. The particular result does not matter, but the fundamental error does. The correction is always the same. Before you will do anything, ask me if your will is in accord with mine. If you are sure that it is, there will be no fear. Fear is always a sign of strain, which arises whenever the will to do conflicts with what you do. This situation arises in two ways. Before I go on, I want to reflect back for just a moment. The particular result does not matter, but the fundamental error does. The correction is always the same. Before you will to do anything, ask me if your will is in accord with mine. And why is that so important? Because when you turn within, and as I often suggest, take a good deep breath and become present to this present moment, and you turn within, when you do that, you have an opportunity to be joined in mind with your higher self, and in this case and in this teaching with our brother Jesus. He says he's available to you. And so we begin the dialogue, and I begin the dialogue by always saying, are you there? And then I feel the connection. It is a feeling, it is a knowing, it is thoughts that you begin to recognize that are not your thoughts. And so he's telling us here that he is with us, he's available, he's here to help us, and before you do anything, ask me if your will, in other words, if your thinking, is in accord with mine. Because his thinking is not distorted by the ego mind, which is fear and guilt and all the thoughts of insanity of the ego mind. If you're sure that it is, there will be no fear. So when we're joined with our higher self, with Jesus, when we turn to the altar within and we are present in this moment and joined in mind, we are in a position to know the state of certainty. We are in a position to recognize a mind that is nothing more than your right mind, our right mind. We are in a position to recognize ourselves without the insanity and the craziness of the thinking self. It's a little bit like when we wake up in the morning, if you will, And the sleeping self has been dreaming some dream, and let's say it's some experience of terror, and when you wake up and realize that you're safe at home in bed and that there's nothing to be afraid of, right? You're safe, you're at home in bed. You come to the realization that the fear was a construct of mind, right? That it was just an idea of mind and being played out in mind and thinking that something is real that is not real. And so he goes on to say, fear is always a sign of strain, which arises whenever the will to do conflicts with what you do. The will to do conflicts with what you do. This situation arises in two ways. First, you can will to do conflicting things, either simultaneously or successively. This produces conflicted behavior, which is intolerable to yourself because the part of the will that wants to do something else is outraged. So inner conflict, yes? Second, you can behave as you think you should, but without entirely willing to do so. This produces consistent behavior, but entails great strain within the self. Obviously, because we aren't happy with our behavior. We're faking it, right? We're not really expressing what we want to express, so we're calling upon ourselves to behave in a way that's incongruent with what we would like to do out of fear, clearly, right? People-pleasing comes to mind, doing things that other people would expect of us or demand of us or whatever, and we acquiesce to our will and we behave in a way that's not truly consistent with what we want to do. Paragraph 79. In both cases, the will and the behavior are out of accord, resulting in a situation in which you are doing what you do not will. This arouses a sense of coercion, which usually produces rage. You ever been upset because somebody wanted you to do something that you just didn't want to do? Yeah, of course, right? The rage then invades the mind, and the projection in the wrong sense is likely to follow. Depression or anxiety is virtually certain. Well, you know, I just have to say, boy, that's a pretty familiar theme right now with a lot of people I'm hearing. They're not doing what they want to do. Their behavior is out of accord with what they want to do. They've been told by the quote-unquote authorities. Yes, I know it's still a free country, supposedly. Excuse me. It's been a long day. We've been told by the authorities to basically go into lockdown, to be self-quarantined, or to be to kind of be homebound and to not get out, to not mingle, to not hang out with family or friends, or to go to work unless we're in essential services. You know, almost everything's essential. I think it's just completely a subjective term that it's being bantered about. Same thing with the 6-foot rule of social distancing. It's, whose idea is that? We don't know. We're just being told, oh, that's what somebody, who somebody thinks is an authority, has decided that, you know, we should not be within 6 feet of other people. Maybe that's based on how far we spray when we sneeze or cough. But you get around people, you know when people are sick. But everywhere I've been, fortunately, I don't see anybody that's sick. I mean, everybody seems to be normal, except that they're not communicating, they're not hugging, they're not, you know, they're practicing social distancing. So yeah, we are a little conflicted, wouldn't you say, because we're behaving outside of what we call or expect to be our norm. 79, remember that whenever there is fear, it's because you have not made up your mind. Your will is split and your behavior inevitably becomes erratic. I want to go back just for kind of a review on those two cases. The first one, you can will to do conflicting things either simultaneously or successively. And the second one was you can behave as you think you should, but without entirely willing to do so. So we're either in conflict because we're doing two things that are really opposed to each other. They are in conflict. What our behavior is doing or what we're thinking we're doing and want to do. And then secondly, we behave as we're not behaving as we think we should. So we're basically acquiescing what we want or what we would like to be doing to some other authority. So remember that whenever there is fear, it's because you have not made up your mind. Paragraph 79. Your will is split, and your behavior inevitably becomes erratic. Correcting it at the behavioral level can shift the error from the first to the second type of strain described above, but you will not obliterate the fear. Okay, we're just behaving in a way that's inconsistent with what we would like to do, and this will not obliterate the fear. It is possible to reach a state in which you bring your will under my guidance. This is Jesus' guidance, the guidance of spirit, under my guidance without much conscious effort. I'm going to read that again. It is possible to reach a state in which you bring your will under my guidance without much conscious effort. But this implies habit, patterns, which you have not developed dependably as yet. So this is where we really practice the practice, which is to be joined in mind, to be joined in union and relationship with Jesus, or joined in union and relationship with our higher self, with the Holy Spirit, which is nothing more than our right mind. So, God cannot ask more than you will. So you have free will. God's not asking more than you. He's not trying to. You cannot be possessed. Let's put it that way. By anything or anyone, really. You cannot be mentally possessed or in mind possessed. So you don't have to be afraid that, there's been a lot of fear, that's been projected on us because it's been demonstrated in the movies and stories and, and all this fabrication that, we could be possessed, the body, the mind and the body could be possessed. And not even God, right? There is no strain in this because God cannot ask more than you will. It's up to you to stay split off, if you will, from the thoughts of God, from the love that is available to us by our own choosing. The strength to do comes from your own undivided will to do. There is no strain in doing God's will as soon as you recognize that it is also your will. When you and God are one, Father, thy will be done. I just want to say that the strength to do comes from your own undivided will to do. But he's really saying there that we are split off, that we are separated, and we are deciding our course of behavior. And there's a strain when we do that because we're conflicted, because we're really not being our true self, because our true self is to be one with God. The lesson here, paragraph 80, is quite simple, but particularly apt to be overlooked. I will therefore repeat it, urging you to listen. Only your mind can produce fear. It does so whenever it's conflicted in what it wills, thus producing inevitable strain because willing and doing become discordant. This cannot be corrected by better doing, but it can be corrected by higher willing. So we go on now to the next subsection, and I just want to see if there's any messages out there. Thank you guys for being there. And I'm just going to say, let me type in here. Except I can't type tonight. Okay. If you're following along and you want to ask a question or something about the conversation we're having, feel free to, you can type it in and I can see your responses there. Excuse me for 1 second. Okay. All right. So we're going to do the correction for lack of love. Subsection 5. We're in chapter 2. The first corrective step is known first, that this is an expression of fear. Then say to yourself that you must somehow have willed not to love, or that the fear which arises from behavior will conflict could not have arisen. Conflict. Let me read it again. Then say to yourself that you must somehow have willed not to love, or that the fear which arises from behavior will conflict could not have arisen. Then the whole process is nothing more than a series of pragmatic steps in the larger process of accepting the atonement as the remedy. These steps can be summarized as follows. I want to go back and read it one more time, because that word can be conflict or conflict. So something can conflict or something can be a conflict. The first corrective step, this is the correction for lack of love, the first corrective step is know first that this is an expression of fear. In other words, whatever our behavior is, we're still back to these situations that arise in two ways. Fear is always a sign of strain. And it arises whenever the will to do conflicts with what you do. The situation arises in two ways. You can will to do conflicting things simultaneously or successively, and secondly, that you behave as you think you should, but without entirely willing to do so. So we're acting against our will, clearly. So the first corrective step in getting through this fear is to know first that this is an expression of fear. In other words, the way we're behaving, the way we're feeling, whatever the depression or anxiety or whatever is going on, he's saying depression and anxiety is virtually certain, and even rage, when those things arouse, the first step is to know first that this is an expression of fear. So this is a way of stating that if you're angry, and Jesus says in this course that there's never an excuse for anger. And the reason he's stating that, the reason he's expressing it that way is expressed right here. He's saying the first corrective step is to know first that this, whatever that might be, anger, depression, anxiety, hatred, apathy, shame, guilt, all that, this is an expression of fear, whatever we're feeling. Then say to yourself that you must somehow have willed not to love, or that fear which arises from behavior will conflict could not have arisen. Then the whole process, is nothing more than a series of pragmatic steps in the larger process of accepting the atonement as the remedy. So here's the steps. He's given us the steps. These steps can be summarized as follows. Know first that this is fear. Fear arises from lack of love. The only remedy for lack of love is perfect love, and perfect love is the atonement. So that's the atonement principle, right? Perfect love. These things, if you will, are what are available to the Christ self, if I can express it that way. The ego self cannot be repaired or fixed or brought into a place to improve itself beyond the level that it operates at. It is a level of consciousness, and it can't change, and it attempts to hypnotize us into believing that we are it, that it is the self that we are. It is our reality. And we've already discovered, at least in conversation, that our mind is split. And there's a part of our mind, just like that part of us that goes to sleep at night, is split off, and it doesn't realize that we're safe. And it doesn't know all of who and what you are. But this self, this awakened self right now that's participating in this conversation with me, you're not asleep, right? Well, I mean, at least you're not that small sleeping self. And, so you don't give it any power over you, because It's really not present. So you're operating at a different level of consciousness. Yeah? Can we agree on that? So what I'm saying here, trying to say, is that we have an opportunity in these steps to realize that this fearful self, the self that's experiencing fear, anger, hatred, whatever all of those attributes might be, is not who we really are. So the who that we really are, and it goes back to over here, he's saying fear is always a sign of strain, which arises whenever the will to do conflicts with what you do, right? And so we are not being our true self. We are not being our whole self. We're not being aware or joined in union and relationship with truth. And love is truth, right? So we're not really being our real self, if you will. The only remedy for lack of love is perfect love, and perfect love is the atonement. I'm saying again, this is not something that you have to condition yourself to be. You can't rise the small self or the sleeping self into being something that it's not. The small sleeping self cannot be more than it is. You can only wake up from it to who you really are in this state of awareness. Yes, the walking around human self, if you will. So, taking one more level, these steps to remedy this, right? A series of pragmatic steps is really about joining now and being completely separate, moving away from the idea and ignoring the thoughts of the small sleeping self, and which is a separated self, and this self, which is also fashions itself as the ego mind to be separated and alone. And and all of its foundation comes from fear, or is founded on fear. So, paragraph 86, we've emphasized that the miracle, which is a sudden shift of perception, or the expression of the atonement, which we now say is perfect love, is the atonement principle. It's the atonement, is perfect love. What's perfect love? No judgment of anything. Perfect love is no judgment of anything, anywhere, or anyone, for anything. Perfect love is the atonement. Very clear. So, I'm going to read the 86 and we'll start there again. We have emphasized that the miracle or the expression of the atonement is always a sign of real respect from the worthy to the worthy. Everyone is worthy. Everyone that you meet as human selves, human beings, has a right to be here, is a perfect child of God, neither behind the point of perfection or advancing toward it. And we must see our brothers and sisters therefrom in order to see ourselves therefrom. As we begin to withdraw judgment and we begin to withdraw the view or the seeing of our brothers and sisters as less than what they are, then we can begin to see ourselves, because they are a reflection of us, we can begin to see ourselves as innocent as well. Really, it's what we're talking about, is seeing the perfect innocence of everyone and everything. So this is always a sign of real respect from the worthy, from you, to the worthy, which is your brothers and sisters. This worth is reestablished by the atonement, perfect love. It's reestablished by the atonement. It is obvious then that when you are afraid, you've placed yourself in a position where you need atonement. Because you have done this, because you have done something loveless, having willed without love. This is precisely the situation for which the atonement was offered. The need for the remedy inspired its creation. As long as you recognize only the need for the remedy, you will remain fearful. However, as soon as you remedy it, you have also abolished the fear. This is how true healing occurs. So we could say that true healing is always, literally, the removal or the absence of fear. Paragraph 87. Everyone experiences fear and no one enjoys it. I would say we would have no trouble in agreeing with that sentence, right? Yet, it would take very little right thinking to realize why fears occurs. Very few people appreciate the real power of the mind, and no one remains fully aware of it all the time. However, if anyone hopes to spare himself from fear, there are some things he must realize and realize fully. The mind is a very powerful creator, and it never loses its creative force. It never sleeps. You don't really sleep at night. Your mind continues. You're there. You see the little dreaming, sleeping self, as I call it, carrying on all of its escapades and its imaginations and fantasies about living life and doing things, but you're safe at home in bed. And it's completely unaware of that. You never really quit living, do you? No, not for an instant. It's impossible. And the mind is a very powerful creator, and it never loses its creative force. It never sleeps. It doesn't ever quit really, we don't ever really quit living. We're living different fantasies of different illusory states. Every instant it is creating, and always as you will. Many of your ordinary expressions reflect this. For example, when you say, don't give it a thought, you imply that if you do not think about something, it will have no effect on you. And this is true enough. But on the other hand, paragraph 88, many other expressions clearly illustrate the prevailing lack of awareness of thought power. For example, you say, just an idle thought, and mean that the thought has no effect. You also speak of some actions as thoughtless, implying that if a person had thought, he would not behave as he did. While expressions like think big give some recognition to the power of thought, they still come nowhere near the truth, and you do not expect to grow when you say it, because you do not really think that you will. So this paragraph, by and large, is simply saying thoughts are things, is another way of expressing the truth about you. Your mind, you are mind. Your mind is always creating. Thoughts are things. And so there really could not be idle thoughts, right? And because thoughts are creating the very experience we're having here in the physical plane. This isn't something that's being done outside of you. It's the world that you're experiencing is an effect. It's no accident that you're listening to my voice right now and discussing and studying A Course in Miracles. You put this in motion, and all of this is showing up for you and for me because this is what we desire. We are creators. Thoughts are things, and things come into manifestation as a result of our very thinking. You do not expect to grow when you say it, when you say, while expressions like think big give some recognition to the power of thought, they still come nowhere near the truth. You do not expect to grow when you say it because you do not really think that you will. It is hard to recognize that thought and belief combine into a power surge that can literally move mountains. It appears at first glance that to believe such power about yourself is merely arrogant. But that is not the real reason why you do not believe it. People prefer to believe that their thoughts cannot exert real control because they are literally afraid of them. And many psychotherapists attempt to help people who are afraid say of their death wishes by depreciating the power of the wish. They even try to free the patient by persuading her that he can think whatever he wants without any real effect at all. Do we believe that now? Because clearly what he's saying is that's not true. You can't just think whatever you want to think without any effect because your thoughts are things. Thoughts are vibrations. They have a resonance. They sing an octave and they travel out and reflect back and bring back to us. They're like a magnet. And they bring back to us as our very experience energies, people, places, and things, and events that are aligned and congruent with those thoughts, the energy, the vibration, the resonance of those thoughts. So there really is a real dilemma here, which only the true right-minded can escape. Death wishes do not kill in the physical sense, but they do kill spiritual awareness. All destructive thinking is dangerous. Given a death wish, a man has no choice except to act upon the thought or behave contrary to it. He thus chooses only between homicide and fear. The other possibility is that he depreciates the power of his thought. This is the usual psychoanalytic approach. It does allay guilt, I'll put it this way. It does allay guilt, but at the cost of rendering thinking impotent. If you believe that what you think is ineffectual, you may cease to be overly afraid of it, but you are hardly likely to respect it. The world is full of examples of how man has depreciated himself because he is afraid of his own thoughts. In some forms of insanity, thoughts are glorified, but this is only because the underlying depreciation was too effective for tolerance. The truth is that there are no idle thoughts. All thinking produces form at some level. Excuse me for a second. Okay. This is a very important sentence, right? This is what we've been saying here for the last few minutes. Thoughts are things. If you read this in here. In some forms of insanity, thoughts are glorified, but this is only because the underlying depreciation was too effective for tolerance. The truth is there are no idle thoughts. All thinking produces form at some level. The reason people are afraid of ESP and so often react against it is because they know that thoughts can hurt them. Their own thoughts have made them vulnerable. ESP being extrasensory perception. We believe that if we join with others that maybe we could be possessed, literally, or somebody could take over our will. Somebody could step in our mind and we become a puppet, or we become uncontrollable. We are not truly being our real self because somebody else has taken over our mind. So we can let go of that altogether. Right? Your will is the same as God's will in the sense that God doesn't override, not even God overrides your will. So if God's not overriding your will, nothing else will either, unless you allow it. I'm talking about your thinking self, your mind. So, their own thoughts have made them vulnerable. Our thoughts, and he's reflecting on the reason people are afraid of ESP, extrasensory perception, and so often react against it because they know that thoughts can hurt them, and their own thoughts have made them vulnerable. Paragraph 92. You, who constantly complain about fear, still persist in creating it. I told you before that you cannot ask me to release you from fear because I know it does not exist. But you do not. If I merely intervened between your thoughts and their results, I would be tampering with the basic law of cause and effect, the most fundamental law there is in the world. I would hardly help if I depreciated the power of your own thinking. Not even God is going to interfere with your will. This is up to you. What you choose to think, what you choose to believe as a result of your thinking. And I would say that almost all of what we believe is because we have been thinking, and it goes out because thoughts are things and reflects and draws back to us things that resonate with that belief system, or those thoughts, I should say. And then we see those things that validate the thoughts, and we begin to convince ourselves that, yeah, I'm right about that thought. That is a true thing. That is, thoughts that become beliefs, or thoughts that we keep thinking over and over and over, and seeing the validation of the thinking. But we're the ones that are making the experiences of the thoughts that we're holding manifest to validate our thoughts. I mean, it's a vicious circle. We just keep going round and round and round in our thinking mind, and our experience and form as it manifests in alignment with our thinking. Kind of crazy, huh? Yeah, very crazy, very, very insane. So he's saying this would be in direct opposition to the purpose of this course. It's much more helpful to remind you that you do not guard your thoughts carefully, except for a small part of the day and somewhat inconsistently even then. You may feel at this point that it would take a miracle to enable you to do this, which is perfectly true. Miracles are a sudden shift of perception, right? Men, paragraph 93, men are not used to miraculous thinking, but they can be trained to think that way. All miracle workers need that kind of training. That would be me and you. We need that kind of training. We absolutely do. I cannot let them leave their minds unguarded, or they will not be able to help me. This is Jesus saying, I cannot let them, his brothers and sisters, leave their minds unguarded, and then, or if they do, then they won't be able to help me. And the awakening of the sonship, the atonement, is about all of us. And you are definitely a light worker, and that's why you're participating in studying this coursework. Miracle working entails a full realization of the power of thought and real avoidance of miscreation. Otherwise, a miracle would be necessary to set the mind itself straight, a circular process which would hardly foster the time collapse for which the miracle was intended. So he kind of introduces another thought here, that miracles collapse time. Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to have, if we truly are incarnating ourselves over and over and over into this form, into this experience of human form, if that's true, let's just say if that's even possible, and that if thoughts are things, and we keep projecting onto the world our resonance of consciousness, our thoughts, and the world then keeps reflecting it back in people, places, things, events, occurrences, the way the world works, or the way the world displays itself to us, then certainly that reinforces the thinking that we are right, our thoughts are correct, and it's circular, as I said before, and here he is saying it's a process, a circular process, which would hardly foster the time collapse for which the miracle was intended. The miracle can collapse time so that we evolve exponentially, consciously, and skip. Wouldn't it be cool to think that, or at least to allow yourself to pretend to think that you're literally potentially escaping dozens, maybe many, many more lifetimes by just reading this coursework. Miracles collapse time. And tragedies and upsets and crazy events that we would have gone through can be completely avoided. And so I think of things like, okay, no more cancer. I don't need that as an experience. I don't need car wrecks as an experience. I don't need heart attacks as an experience. In other words, the body begins to heal itself. We begin to slow down and ultimately mitigate the aging process. We become more joyful, and in that joyful, we have joyful thoughts. Guess what's reflecting back as our experience is joyful thoughts or joyful events. People, places, things. It's circular, right? What do you want to experience? Is the question we should be asking ourselves continuously. What do you want to experience? What do I want to experience? More joy, more love, more laughter, more peace, more bliss, more love. Cause and effect, giving and receiving, all these things are one. Everything begins to collapse into oneness when you really do begin to realize how powerful you really are. It's unimaginable to the small thinking self because it sees itself as unworthy. But it's not all of what you are. The Christ self is the self that can learn that these things are the truth and can begin to influence and become expressed as who and what we are. And that is, again, the miracle. So, men are not used to miraculous thinking, but they can then be trained to think that way. And all miracle workers need that kind of training. Very well, very much so. Otherwise, a miracle would be necessary to set the mind itself straight, a circular process which would hardly foster the collapse of time, the time collapse for which the miracle was intended. Nor would it induce the healthier respect for true cause and effect which every miracle worker must have. So let's go through one more paragraph, and that'll take us to paragraph 95 on page 34, or 35. So we're going to finish up with paragraph 94 on page 34. Both miracles and fear come from thoughts. And if you were not free to choose one, you would also not be free to choose the other. By choosing the miracle, that's your choice, you have rejected fear. You have been afraid of God, of me, of yourselves, and of practically everyone you know at one time or another. This is because you have misperceived or miscreated us and believe in what you have made. You would never have done this if you were not afraid of your own thoughts. The vulnerable are essentially miscreators because they misperceive creation. So there we have it. So what do we know so far? I'm just going to recap real quickly. We've got a couple of minutes. We've talked about the illusion of separation. The mind is split. Like our mind splits out again when we go to sleep at night and we become the sleeping self, or we believe ourselves to be the sleeping self, it becomes our experience. Right? And this is really the fall of man, the fall of mankind, the fall of us as humans. And I'm just going to look on page 19 at paragraph 6. If you consider carefully what this entails, the following will become quite apparent. First, the assumption is implicit that what God created can be changed by the mind of man, and it can't. Second, the concept that what is perfect can be rendered imperfect, or wanting is accepted, and that's a lie. And third, the belief that man can distort the creations of God, including himself, is accepted, and that's a lie. And fourth, the idea that since man can create himself, which is the lie, the direction of his own creation is up to him, is implied. So we rely on ourselves and our stinking thinking to determine who we are and what we will be and how we will express and how we will be human, how we're being. And that really is the beginning of the explanation of the fall. The soul has not only been fully created, but has also been created perfect. So when I have a dry erase board and get a little bit more technology, maybe I can get this worked out. It's hard to kind of get our head around it, but the soul is created perfect, so we could say the soul is this level up here, right? And we could say maybe God, if we could put levels on it, we have God, and then God created the soul, and the soul is perfect. But then the Christ self, the mind that's awakening and remembering itself, we could say, kind of fell asleep. The child of God, we could call that Christ, kind of fell asleep, pretending, joining together, and said, what would it be like to be separate from God? What would it be like to play God? To play and pretend that we're something other than what we are, that we are not joined, that we're not perfect, that we're not all of what we really are. And in that illusory game playing, the game of separation, we adopted all of these assumptions. That what God created can be changed, and what is perfect can be rendered imperfect, and that we can distort the creations of God, and that we created ourselves. So those are the basic four things in the first section of the introduction of the chapter. And then the reinterpretation of defenses, he's really helping us to see that fear manifests out as defense, because all of our thinking in fear, we tend to continue to do things, to behave in ways to defend ourselves. We do everything from building walls around ourselves, literally, and we do it on mass scales like countries, right? We're building a wall between us and Mexico right now, and we have a perceived wall between us and Canada. We build walls of protection to believe that we can protect ourselves from our neighbors because we need to, right? To protect ourselves. And that's all out of fear. So attack, attack is also a defense. And so in reading through this, we discovered several things, and it's worth going back and reading it, how the mind can be deluded into believing that it's defending itself by its actions, because, but all those things are really a denial of our power, a denial of who and what we really are. So that goes into denial. Can be corrected. It can be, there's a proper use of denial, if you remember that. We talk also about the atonement and how it requires a total commitment. And eventually we get to section 3, which is healing as release from fear, which we have said, again, this whole section of the book, of this chapter 2, really helps us to see that this is, this whole construct of being human and being separate and being vulnerable and dying and being subject to sickness and sin and death is just a construct of an insane mind. It's not at all who and what we really are. It's not. And then tonight, last week began, but tonight really covered fear as a lack of love, which was a pretty short section, but fear really is just a lack of love. It's not, it's being out of our own mind, out of our right mind. It's an insane construct that what God created, going back to those 4 assumptions, it could be true. And and then we began with section 5, the correction tonight for lack of love. And we talked about the atonement. To summarize the 4 steps, first know that whatever this thing is that we're experiencing fear, for whatever that experience, however it's manifesting, is we have to acknowledge that it's fear. We have to acknowledge that it's our thinking. This is about being self-honest, and this is about taking our power back. First, know that this is fear. Second, that fear arises from lack of love. Third, that only remedy for lack of love is perfect love, and that perfect love is the atonement. The atonement principle, where we literally get on board with the process of releasing ourselves from fear. In the last paragraph we read, 94, both miracles and fear come from thoughts, and if you were not free to choose one, you would also not be free to choose the other. We have a choice. It's the only thing we ever need to do is make a choice. To take that good deep breath, to join within, and begin the dialogue, and allow ourselves, by listening, to be informed of the truth by who and what we really are, the child of Christ, the perfect child of Christ. The soul that God created is what we are in its perfection, and the child of Christ that we are, playing this little game of separation, can indeed come to know itself in its own truth of who and what we are. So we will close out tonight with a prayer. I just really appreciate you hanging out and being with me and giving me the opportunity to read through this wonderful textbook again, and I take great pleasure from it, and I hope you do too. So let's take a good deep breath, and we'll close out with prayer. I am surrounded by the love of God. Father, you stand behind me and beside me, in the place I see myself and everywhere I go. You are in all things. I look upon the things I look upon, the sounds I hear, and every hand that reaches for my own. In you, time disappears, and place becomes a meaningless belief. For what surrounds your Son and keeps him safe is love itself. There is no source but this, and nothing is that does not share its holiness, that stands beyond your own creation, your one creation, or without the love which holds all things within itself. Father, your child is like yourself. We come to you in your own name today to be at peace within your everlasting love. My brothers, join with me in this today. This is salvation's prayer. Must we not join in what will save the world along with us? Yes, we do join. We choose. We get to choose in every moment. Fear or love. Take a good deep breath, turn within, and simply ask, are you there? What is the truth here? And let the voice of love, the Holy Spirit, or your brother Jesus, it's a collective consciousness of truth and love and oneness that always speaks in union in its expression, and it will indeed comfort us, comfort you, and help you know the truth that you are perfect, neither behind the point of perfection nor advancing toward it. I appreciate you being with me tonight. I love you so very much. And thanks again for allowing me the opportunity to be with you. So I'm signing off, brothers. Talk to you soon. Have a great week, and we'll pick it up again next Thursday. Good night.